don't know how many of you have noticed, but men and women have physical differences. I know, you're shocked and appalled, but it gets worse. Men have physical advantages when it comes to fighting. Today, I want to explore the specific biological differences that give men such notable advantages in combat sports. We'll discuss what these differences are, what biological factors cause them, and why these differences might have evolved. I don't really have an argument I'm trying to make in this video. It's just cool information, and I wanted to talk about it. While none of you should be surprised that men have physical advantages, you probably will be surprised at the sheer volume and severity of these advantages. And I guarantee that there will be information in here that you haven't heard before. First of all, why would men have these physical advantages? What evolutionary pressures would have caused this? Well, much of the sexual dimorphism found in mammals is due to male-on-male competition. Essentially, males fighting for access to females. It's why certain male animals have tusks, horns, and other weapons. It's also why so many male animals are larger than their female counterparts. Now, human males obviously don't have tusks or horns. Instead, we have a myriad of physiological adaptations that drive peak force production and durability. And many of these adaptations really don't help us hunt food or fight off predators. They just help us fight other humans. The idea that men evolved to fight each other in pre-agricultural societies is currently just a theory, since we don't have a lot of examples of pre-agricultural societies that we can observe. However, I think you'll find that the evidence does seem to point in that direction. So, let's get into it. First of all, men are physically stronger than women. We all know this. But the question is, why are men stronger? Is it just because they're bigger, or is it because they are proportionally made up of more muscle? Are male muscles any stronger pound for pound, or are men just able to push their muscles harder? The answer is yes. Men are obviously larger on average, with that being so obvious that I refuse to get into the specifics because it's boring. What's slightly more interesting is that men are leaner. The average body fat percentage in the US is 28.1% for men and 39.9% for women. So, on average, a 150-pound man would have 42 pounds of fat, and a 150-pound woman would have almost 60 pounds of fat. And while individual amounts of body fat are about diet and exercise, the sex differences in body fat aren't. Essential body fat is how much fat you need for your body to function properly and not die or have serious health complications. For a man, this number is 2 to 5%. However, for a woman, this number is 10 to 13%. Pound for pound, the average woman needs over 3 times as much body fat as men do in order for their bodies to function properly. This means that men typically have a higher lean body mass, which is the mass of your body if we sucked all the fat off of it. If a man and a woman were both in the same weight class, the man's lean body mass would likely be significantly greater. So even men and women of the same weight aren't really the same size. Unsurprisingly, it's also been found that men have higher muscle cross-sectional area, which is just how thick your muscles are if we were to cut your limb in half and measure the thickness. But even when you account for lean body mass or muscle cross-sectional area, meaning that you compare men and women with the exact same amount of muscle, men are still stronger. This is because there are different types of muscles, the most common ones being type 1, type 2A, and type 2B. Type 1 is slower and weaker, but much more efficient. It's what we use for most daily tasks and for better fine motor control. Type 2A is stronger and more explosive, but less efficient. And type 2B is like type 2A, but even more explosive and even less efficient. Type 1 fibers are broken up into small bundles of muscle fibers called motor units, with a single nervous system impulse activating each bundle. Type 2 muscles, on the other hand, are divided into larger motor units, allowing a single nerve impulse to activate more muscle fibers at once. This means that type 2A and type 2B fibers give more power when they sense a nerve impulse, but Those larger motor units use up a ton of energy, fatigue quickly, and allow less precision of movement. Men have larger type 2A and type 2B muscles than women do, resulting in higher peak strength, meaning that a man might be able to curl more than a woman even if their biceps are the same size. However, those type 2 fibers use up a ton of energy and quickly fatigue, giving women noticeably better muscular endurance. Women might not be able to lift weights that are as heavy, but they have an advantage in lifting lighter weights more times. Differences also present themselves when looking at individual motor units. Research consistently shows that men have a larger range of motor unit discharge rates, which is the frequency at which your nervous system tells your muscles to contract. You see, every nerve impulse only contracts a motor unit for a split second, which doesn't do a whole lot in practice. But a bunch of really fast impulses keeps that motor unit contracting continuously. This means that discharge rates are one of the main things that can determine how hard your muscle is working. When lifting at 20% intensity, men have a lower discharge rate than women, meaning that women are getting more performance out of their muscles. But at 100% intensity, men have a higher discharge rate, giving the male nervous system a wider range of intensity signals that they're able to send to the muscles. This is evidence that male nervous systems might be able to push their muscles harder than female nervous systems, and therefore have a wider range of strength settings that they can set their muscles to. So if you pick an average man and an average woman, the man is obviously stronger. If you make sure that they're the same weight, the man is still stronger. If you find a man and woman with the same total amount of muscle, the man is still stronger. If you then make sure that man and woman have the same types of muscle in the same exact amounts, the man might still be stronger. Of course, having larger muscles that are less efficient and are able to work harder has some pretty predictable metabolic costs. To fuel this machine, men have to consume about 25% more calories per pound of body weight. In a modern first world country, that might not matter too much, because I can go to the grocery store. But in times of food shortage and starvation, as was commonly experienced throughout most of human history, needing 25% more food than someone else the exact same size as you might become a big problem. And to add to men's starvation woes, women are also better at metabolizing fat, meaning that they can break down their excess fat stores, which they had more of anyway, for energy more efficiently than men can break down their fat stores. While men have clear advantages in strength, that's not the only variable that matters in a fight. It's also about where that strength is located. While women have about 80% of male strength in their lower bodies, they only have about 50% in their upper bodies. This disproportionate advantage in upper body strength allows men to grapple and punch harder. Men also have a higher center of gravity, allowing them to put more of their body weight behind upper body strikes. The trade-off is that men can't do this, because their center of mass is now too far forward to balance. In fact, researchers have even found that men have a greater advantage in a punching motion compared to a spear throwing motion, implying that male physicality involved less for hunting purposes and more for fighting purposes. Proportionally, men have considerably thicker necks than women do, and the male skull even has more prominent mastoid process, giving these large neck muscles a better attachment point. A thick, muscular neck, by the way, is one of the very few visible signs of an experienced fighter, as fighting is one of the few activities that makes heavy use of the neck muscles, meaning that one of the biggest differences in male and female musculature is in the one spot where extra strength is almost only useful for interpersonal combat. So not only do men have more muscle and stronger muscle, but they also pack on muscle in areas that are likely to be more beneficial for fighting. Now, to feed oxygen to all that questionably efficient muscle, men also have greatly increased cardiovascular systems. Male lungs are 30% larger, which are able to fit because men have significantly larger rib cages. However, men have larger lungs even when you adjust for the size of the rib cage, because women's organs have to be small enough to allow pregnancy to shove everything into the rib cage. Male torsos have to make no such concessions, and that extra passenger space is instead used for a bigger gas tank. When breathing, men and women also favor different mechanisms, with men making heavier use of the diaphragm to pull the lungs down, and women making comparatively greater use of the rib muscles to expand the rib cage and lungs outwards. Women rely less on the diaphragm pulling down because, once again, their body has to make allowances for pregnancy, and pulling your lungs down isn't very easy when there's a baby in the way. Of course, facilitating these larger lungs means that men also have larger nasal cavities and even larger cranial airways built into the shape of their skulls. This allows more air to flow through their heads and into their trachea, which is also significantly larger in men. These adaptations give men a lower airflow resistance, meaning that air flows more easily between the mouth and lungs. Lower resistance and larger lungs means that men have greater flow volume loops, meaning they can move a lot more air than women typically can, and they can do so at a greater physiological efficiency. You see, the muscles that manage breathing use energy, but breathing is necessary to get the oxygen to use energy. Male respiratory activity actually uses less energy for the same given volume of oxygen, and not only can men suck in more oxygen more efficiently, but they also get it to their muscles more efficiently. They have proportionally larger hearts, which moves the blood around, higher red blood cell count, which carries oxygen to the body, and higher amounts of hemoglobin, which is the protein within red blood cells that carries the oxygen. If you imagine the vascular system like a train, male trains have a larger engine, more cars on it, and each car is also larger. All of this means that men are able to suck in and use oxygen more quickly, which is measured in VO2 max, and overall, it's about 20% higher in men compared to women. However, it's not just about energy and power output, as men are also more physically robust and durable, starting with the fact that men have 25% thicker skin due to their higher levels of collagen. That's literally thicker skin. I don't know about figuratively thicker skin. Which sex is less vulnerable to verbal insults is outside the scope of this video. However, men also have significantly stronger tendons, which is an important variable in connective tissue injuries. The study I looked at examined the patellar tendon in physically trained and untrained people. The patellar tendon being the thing that holds your kneecap to your shin. In men that exercise, the tendon was predictably thicker than in those that didn't exercise because it adapted to habitual mechanical loading. It's the same thing that your muscles do. When you work out, they get bigger. However, in women, the tendon was the same size in the trained and the untrained group, meaning that women's tendons might not adapt to exercise as well as men's do. However, even when examining a tendon fascicle of similar thickness, a fascicle being a tiny bundle of collagen fibers that make up a tendon, researchers found that the male fascicles were also mechanically stronger. So if you look at men and women of the same size, men have stronger connective tissue. Same lean body mass, men have stronger connective tissue. Same tendon cross-sectional area, still stronger connective tissue. Are you seeing a pattern here? And these differences can have real effects on things like injuries, with women reporting much higher rates of connective tissue injuries when compared with men. This is exacerbated by the fact that men and women have differently angled limbs. You see, both your arms and your legs kick out at the elbow and knee joints. In arms, this is called the carrying angle. In the legs, it's called the Q angle. Women actually have noticeably larger carrying and Q angles than men do, and that has consequences in sports performance. When cutting or juking, a low Q angle results in the force traveling straight up the leg, while a high Q angle results in the leg attempting to fold in half laterally. This puts extra stress on the ACL, which is the ligament that primarily resists that folding motion. When you combine this with the fact that women have proportionally weaker connective tissue anyway, it's no surprise that women are at a much higher risk for ACL injuries than men are. However, some of the most obvious differences in durability can be found in the skeleton. Male bones are typically thicker, even when adjusted for body size, as testosterone is instrumental in promoting bone growth. In addition, they have a proportionally higher amount of cortical bone and a lower amount of trabecular bone. Cortical bone being the dense, compact bone you normally see on the outside of bones, and trabecular bone being the softer, spongier bone that you normally see on the inside of bones. This means that men's bones are stronger and harder than a comparative woman's bone. In the face, men have a larger and wider jaw, a more prominent brow ridge, and more robust maxilla and zygomatic bones. You may notice that these are the bones commonly broken in fights, which is another piece of evidence supporting the idea that some of the sex differences specifically evolved for fighting. This buildup of bone also crowds out the face, giving male eyes the appearance of being smaller, possibly protecting them from harm. And this also likely explains why anime artists seem to think that women's eyeballs are twice as large as men's eyes when they're actually the same size. And then you have whatever this is. Dear goodness, someone put it out of its misery. Anyway, there are plenty more sex differences that could affect physical performance in a fight. Men have longer wingspans relative to their height, giving men greater reach and a longer limb to swing and generate force with. Their hands are proportionally larger, making the mass of their fists more significant. Combined with their wingspan, this means they're essentially swinging a hammer with a heavier head and a longer handle. Men also have a higher hand index, which is the hand's width divided by its height times 100. Higher hand indexes are thought to be better at making more structurally robust fists, as shorter and wider hands can more easily curl their fingers in to create broad and sturdy fists. Compare this orangutan hand with this gorilla hand. Now guess which species is known for being more violent with each other. It's also thought that the hands of certain primates evolved not just for grasping and manipulation, but also for causing damage, with the hand index being one of the primary pieces of evidence. Even brain and nervous system differences between men and women are noteworthy. Men have faster reaction times and are better at visually tracking fast-moving objects. Both of these attributes have pretty obvious advantages for striking. Men also have better spatial intelligence, including better 3D rotation, which is very helpful for visualizing and understanding grappling moves. You probably already know that men have lower social and emotional intelligence compared with women, making it more difficult for them to operate in social groups, which is a key human evolutionary advantage. However, the only aspect of social intelligence that men consistently score higher on are recognizing anger, aggression, and threatening cues. Men evolved just enough social intelligence for fighting and then stopped. Even when hurt, men display a lower sensitivity to pain than women do. They are more competitively motivated and exhibit higher risk-taking behavior. One of the most interesting differences is unfortunately anecdotal, but basically every martial arts coach will back me up on this. And that is that women are more coachable, but men still somehow seem to have higher skill ceilings. Women tend to do the exact move in the exact way you tell them to do it, and men don't. Instead, men are constantly trying to modify the move, do different moves, or otherwise find a way to ignore instructions. And just like a toddler, men also incessantly ask dumb questions like, why? And does that really work? Yet, despite their never-ending horseplay during sparring, men often display what looks like way better instincts and adaptability. I believe this is due to a difference in mindset between average men and average women. Based on the testimony of martial arts instructors and my own experience, it appears that women approach martial arts from a more process-oriented perspective, while men approach from a more goal-oriented perspective. If you want more details, I made a whole video on this, but the short version is that women are attempting to follow the recipe as it's written, and men are looking for as many shortcuts to their destination as they can possibly find. And while process-oriented students are a lot easier to teach, fighting is fundamentally a goal-dependent endeavor, meaning that the male tendency to modify and adapt is ultimately much more useful when push comes to literal shove. Once again, this is anecdotal, and I don't currently have any research to back this up, but I've seen many instructors comment on the sex divide in coachability, and I believe that mindset could easily explain the observed differences. Of course, while the vast majority of fun facts in this video are very much a matter of nature instead of nurture, this difference could easily be either. It's entirely possible that differences in perceived coachability are more down to cultural norms and socialization rather than biology. Or it could be 100% genetic. I just don't know. While all of these differences collectively confer massive advantages to men in physical competitions, they come with significant costs in many other areas of life. I already touched on several of these, including muscular endurance, caloric needs, fat metabolizing, and social intelligence, but I want to touch on a few more. Notably, men have weaker immune systems and ultimately live shorter lives. Men's higher risk-taking behavior might make them more courageous, but it also leads to a lot of dumb decisions and premature death. And all the physiological trade-offs that women had to make because of pregnancy also means that women are evolutionarily vital to the survival of the species, and men are expendable. While men might have evolved to fight, women evolved to survive hardship. This can actually be seen in ultramarathons. While men are faster runners, longer distance races start to become less about athletic performance and more about survivability and how much punishment your body can take, which is why the differences in race times between men and women shrink in longer distance races. And past 195 miles, women actually perform a tiny bit better than men do. Now, this is if you draw a statistical line of best fit. There is no 195-mile race, but you get the point. In times of disease, famine, and hardship, women's lower caloric needs, higher fat stores, and better social abilities give them a clear edge. Men, on the other hand, are well designed for combat, but basically nothing else. To use a rough analogy, women are like hybrid sedans and men are like muscle cars. Muscle cars are fast, more powerful, and have high performance engines. But they also suck gasoline like it's free and seem to break down every other day. The smaller hybrid, however, requires only a seasonal trip to the gas station and still does everything you would expect a normal car to do. Plus, after a couple 100,000 miles, the sedan probably works fine, while the muscle car is probably scrap metal. The hybrid is an objectively better vehicle, unless you're in a drag race. Then the muscle car is going to win in convincing fashion. However, remember that while men have very significant advantages in a fight, these are comparing averages. Average man, average woman. They are not absolute, and the differences can be overcome with proper skill and conditioning. Amanda Nunes would turn the average man inside out. But I did want to talk about the sheer volume and breadth of the differences, because it fascinates me. And note that this video is a non-exhaustive list of only the differences that can affect the outcome of a fistfight. But other sex differences are still really cool, and my new hobby is trying to identify the sex of skeletons. See if you can guess these 5. Although you'll probably need to know a lot more about skeletal sex differences than I explained in this video. So good luck!
I see no boob bones. The victim was a man.